Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness. I've been encouraging folks to reach out and not just touch someone, but touch me. Not directly, but just metaphorically in terms of getting in contact with me, letting me know how you're feeling about the show as I'm kind of plotting and planning changes I'll be rolling out later this year. Of course, I always urge people to leave a review, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. It really does seem to make a difference, and it also makes me happy. I mean, even if you say negative things, it's kind of good, because if you bother to write it all, I mean, I'm probably not pissing you off that much, because I'm wishy-washy enough that it's really hard for people to, tie me down to one perspective that then they can, attack me on. Although it does happen on occasion. But mostly the information I get or the feedback I get is pretty positive. I want to remind you, too, that PRN has started up a voicemail line where they invite folks to come and leave audio messages about their shows. That line is 862-800-6805, 862-800-6805, and it's experiment like all this stuff. Got a couple of good emails this week. One encouraging me to dive into Twin Peaks, which we'll do one of these days. I'm looking for just the awesomest guests, because I am not a master of the arcana by any stretch of the imagination, and I'm interested in talking to some folks, particularly not another nerdy white guy. But, sometimes it's just a nerdy white guy scene. Like today is going to be a nerdy white guy scene. We do our best. Another person, really, happens a lot. People encourage me to do a longer format, more of a Joe Rogan, multiple hours kind of scene. And at the same time, I talk to other people, and they love that it's only an hour. They know it's going to be done. They know how long it's going to be. So I might try to work out some weird combination of those two modes. Stay tuned on that one. And the sweetest thing anybody said is from a musician, Sean Feeney, who talked about how I've always appreciated how Expanding Mind never tells people what to think, but rather the conversations on your show provide a model of how to think and how to engage deeply with others. Well, that was really sweet. And I think it's a wonderful way to launch into our conversation today, because I'm talking to my old friend, Douglas Rushkoff, author of the new book, Team Human, and of course, author of gazillions of other books, many of which are very important, and they're still really relevant, even the ones he wrote 20 years ago. But particularly some of the recent ones, Present Shock was a rock and roller. Team Human is the most manifesto-like of any of them, so it's got a different kind of energy, responding to the urgency of our moment, as did Present Shock. But this one is a real different. It's really trying to do something different in the reader. But of course, Doug's also a documentarian. He's written comic books. He's also really close to me, because when I first was starting to do research that eventually became Technosis, I heard about this guy, this other New York writer, was doing this book on similar topics, and then he came out with Siberia, and really jumped way ahead of me in terms of diving into the deep end of the Kool-Aid in a fun and stimulating way that I can still see traces of. Doug is very much in my kind of generation and mind frame in a lot of ways, in terms of big influences from Timothy Leary, from Marshall McLuhan, from Marxist or leftist kind of critiques of capitalism, but at the same time mixed with a humanism and love of art and literature. So I always really like to see where he's going. But that idea of modeling a conversation is I think really key, because that's one of the things that Douglas is talking about in his new book, which is that we're on a team. We're in a team, folks. And if we're in a team, and this team is going to fight some of the other teams that are mounting most formidable forces against us with all manner of technologies and out of control algorithms, both literally digital and metaphorically capital, and value systems, etc., that we need to find the others and know how to talk with the others and talk as others. And so hopefully we'll be doing some of that today. So, Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Excellent. We were just talking before we started recording about how this book, the rollout, the talks, the podcasts, the conversations, has been different for you. And you've written so many books. So when you say that, it's like that means something, because it's not like, the same old thing. You've been doing this. You've done this many times. So if you notice a difference, something different is happening. What is it about either this project or this time in history, that is making Team Human hit in a different angle or with a different velocity?
Well, I mean, I guess it's two things. I mean, first off, I don't know. For the first time, I don't feel like my book tour has a utilitarian purpose. In other words, I'm not doing it for something else. I'm not going out on tour to sell books, to push product. I'm not trying to get people to do something. The events I've been doing so far, they've been so much like for their own sake. It was almost as if anything was for anything, it was like I wrote the book in order to get to have these events, in order to get to have these live encounters. I mean, I'm happy to have done the book, this great industrial age product, that can get to places that I can't and reach people and spend it. It can spend all sorts of time with people that I can't spend myself. But the events I'm doing, even if they're at a bookstore or somewhere, they're not subservient to that. They're not, you know what I mean? I'm not there to get something done. I'm not going to sit there and read from the book and tell people why they should get it. And no, it's like, it's for something else more important. And it was very strange. I did one in New York at this place, and I didn't expect it to be even that good, at this place called BetaWorks Studios. It's a, like a tech development co-working space down in the meatpacking district of Manhattan. And I thought it would be an interesting kind of preview thing to do and see what they think of these ideas. And like 200 and something people jam into this place that was like big enough for 80. And I didn't feel like, it wasn't me like initiating something. It wasn't me sparking the revolution or something, but it was more like I was present at it, that my book or this event was the excuse for people to come together and say, not quite, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore, but we don't like the way this has been going. We don't like the way Silicon Valley has been steering the future of humanity through its technologies. And we want to retrieve some much more essential human values and start building a world that's friendly to us humans. And it was weird. It was like being at this revolution, and not in some egotistical way that Rushkoff says, let's gather here and do it. It wasn't really that at all. It was like, I felt so much less like the presenter than just this other person in this room who maybe was doing a little bit more articulation than others. But
yeah, that's really great. I mean, there's so many things you've said there that strike me. I mean, one is this sense of why you do what you do, and I've been wrestling with some of these issues doing this podcast, because for many years I really kept my head in the sand. Like, I didn't really pay attention to the podcast world. I didn't really look at numbers. I didn't think about what competitors were doing, or even thinking about them as competitors. And I still don't really think about them as competitors. But as soon as you start to quantify, and then there's some anxiety about what you're doing, and we're in this competitive environment, and you're supposed to be making money, and then, oh my God, there's a windfall if you just do it right, blah, blah, blah. And I noticed as soon as I got kind of caught up with those things, that I would drift away from the sort of goal, drift away from the kind of endless value of just keeping the conversation rolling without having it drive towards some kind of sell. And particularly like the line that guy was talking about, where, I don't really know, and I'm interested in keeping the space open of not knowing, and also of being able to strongly not know, to say things like, where we're going with technology right now is a nightmare. I can see the nightmare on the horizon, like so many people. I don't know how to stop it. I don't know what else we need to do, but that doesn't mean, we have to make space for this kind of conversation. And what you're saying about the response at that no doubt very kind of techie heavy environment in New York that you were at, is it reminds me of the weird way that like Yuval Harari is like this sort of superstar in Silicon Valley, even though what he says is in some ways, very bleak and believable account of how these kinds of post-human technologies are even likely to undermine human agency. And yet there's this kind of exuberance around him, some way that he resonates. He doesn't come off as a neo-Luddite. He doesn't come off as a Bill McKibben or somebody who's just who's perceived as a crank or perceived as someone outside of the fold. And because you, and to some degree me, are also associated with this technology world that we drank deeply of 90s digital utopianism and really kind of enjoyed in some ways some of the transhuman impulses that at a certain point were setting in motion shifts in consciousness and culture around technology, that when we go, oh boy, or eek, or whatever the kind of core emotional response is, there might be a lot more room for people who are now profoundly ambivalent but confused or still getting paid that way and not really sure how to regroup, to be able to shift and to be able to really directly engage the urgency of the moment and not, turn away from the sort of mythology that keeps getting iterated about disruption and, the force of evolution and how it's evolving into these post-human forms, and we just got to go with it, and all of these things that you analyze, quite well in Team Human. It feels like there is some space for a different kind of conversation, and hopefully more than conversation, hopefully more than action. So what do you, in terms of that more than conversation mode, how do you see your role? Are you kind of like a John the Baptist and the real force, the real figurehead, or the collective shift is kind of ahead or in a different zone? Or do you see Team Human for you and the events you've been doing as really attempting to broaden this into a kind of movement? Do you want it to be a movement?
Yeah, a movement of sorts. I mean, not a movement like, Martin Luther King, marching down Fifth Avenue arm in arm with this one and that one. It's not like, let's keep our eyes on the prize and an ends justifies the means journey towards salvation, but a movement where, people feel comfortable engaging with one another. I mean, it's funny. I mean, movements are so political, and you know what I mean? They seem to really generate oppositions really quickly. But a movement of sorts, yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm going to different places or planting seeds or lighting fires or really just acknowledging people who are already there saying these things, becoming an excuse sometimes for those people to find one another. I'm ending events now by saying, okay, anybody who has a need and anybody who has an offering, what are they? Let's match the people who have stuff to offer with the people who need stuff. And what do you all want to talk about? And sort of doing breakup groups and just letting people, find others to collaborate with, because so many people feel really alone in this. They'll walk around in the street and see everybody looking in their smartphones or having certain kinds of jobs, and they don't realize that how many, maybe everybody, is feeling this way. And it's so it really shouldn't be too hard to mobilize.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. I mean, what you do a really good job. There's some really standout analyses in the book. You're talking about things that I'm, fairly familiar with, but then you draw it together with a really excellent example or a reframing that I hadn't thought of. And one that was really interesting was that you were talking about how digital telephony, the way that the computers shift the quality of a phone call in comparison to the earlier analog zone, where there really was a kind of analog presence or a trace of an analog presence in a phone call. And phone calls could be really quite intimate. But there's something kind of chilly and disturbing about them now. And I was just sort of unconsciously thought, oh, I'm just kind of, there's so much communication now. I'm just kind of sick of the phone. I don't want to deal with it anymore. But you explained the way in which even this device that, though technological, was once very much associated with intimacy, cradling the little phone, especially if you're talking to a lover, and being able to whisper into it or speak more closely and have that really have an effect. With digital telephony, it's reduced to this tiniest bandwidth signal, and there's all this latency, so we just don't sense that presence. And the same thing happens with our much vaunted video phones. The one Jetsons thing we got was these video phones. But while they're useful in some sense, and it's nice to see old friends from the other side of the planet and to see, your lover's eyes or something when you haven't seen them for a while, it's also very hollow. And it really struck me about even these points of the digital environment, a phone call, a video call with someone you know well, even these points where there's sort of maximum implied intimacy, there's still something very hollow about it. And so looking at all those people reading their phones all the time and on the public transportation or out in the city, you get this sense of like seeking, filling, trying to fill this desire for connection. And the whole thing is like connection. And yet it's really hollow, and we don't know what to do. It's like, it's such an addictive kind of behavior. I do it. How do we shift?
The science backs this up too. I mean, I spent a lot of time with a guy named William Softke looking at the way that rapport gets established between people. I mean, and we know in real life we have, these painstakingly evolved social mechanisms. For 500,000 years, we learned how to read someone else's face to see if they're flushing or going pale, if their pupils are getting larger or smaller, if their breathing is syncing to ours or not, if they're making micro movements, and those all help us establish rapport with another person. When you see those things happening, the mirror neurons in your brain fire and oxytocin goes through your bloodstream and you can bond and all this stuff happens. And to some extent, it's funny, it happens in real life. And folks like, say, Walter Benjamin, probably in the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, when he was talking about aura and how we have this loss of aura when we look at a photograph or listen to a recording. To us now, industrial age connection, like a photograph or an analog phone call, feels like aura compared to screens and digital recordings, which feel like nothing. So you have a conversation with someone on Skype or FaceTime and they agreed with you and said that they agreed with you, but you get off the phone and part of your body and mind aren't they're comparing notes and they have different responses. So your brain is saying, yes, she agreed with me. She definitely agreed with me. But your body is saying, but I didn't get the feedback that I was expecting from someone who agrees with me. So you end up feeling like the person lied to you. You end up distrusting the person. We don't evolve to distrust a medium. We didn't evolve with media. We evolved with other people. So we blame the other person. We don't blame the technology through which we were attempting to connect. And the weirder part of that is, because we're not getting that feedback that we're expecting, because it's just a little bit off, because the latency is almost connecting but not, that's what actually addicts you to the technology. If we got what we needed from the technology, we wouldn't be addicted. We'd just be satisfied. Instead, we go back because it's not quite feeding the thing that we feel like it's feeding. It's like a cheese doodle instead of real food.
Yeah, no, it's a remarkable thing. And then, of course, at the same time, and it increases that sense also, the sort of ambient distrust of people and of people's motives.
Right.
And at the same, and that's of course happening at the same time that there is a sort of whatever the rise of the entrepreneurial self. Everybody has a scam. Everybody has a scheme, a thing that they're trying to pull off. Even bohemians, even artists. Everybody's like being taught to not just have a conversation, not just develop a shared worldview, or to play even, but to always be kind of on the make, always be kind of trying to maximize, to efficientize, to
Right.
optimize the
Maximize
relationship.
your utility value.
Mm-hmm.
What's the purpose of this phone call? What are we going to do? We've got 10 minutes. What are we going to accomplish? It's like, what am I going to get from you? What are you going to get from me to make it an even transaction? I mean, that's why governments become transactional too. That's the only way we understand stuff. And really the analysis to use would be less technological than capitalism. Capitalism expressing itself through digital technology yields LinkedIn, not the well.
Exactly. No, it's and that's one of the things I really love about your book, and that I hope actually moves minds, is that you understand technology and media very well. You are critical of how technology and media are deployed. You are sensitive, and again sometimes quite acutely, to the particular qualities of a given medium or its affordances, to use the fancy word you also use, dictate certain behaviors or responses. But you're also very clear about the problem is not technology per se. I mean, some technologies might have some inherent problems, but that the problem really is more about capitalism, and especially the totalitarian drive of capital. It's not even, like capitalism is not the same thing as the market. And in some ways, it just sort of exploits the idea of the market, and it takes advantage of real markets to do its other more monopolistic, more controlling kind of thing. But even if that kind of capitalism just stayed in its sort of zone, it might not be the worst thing in the world, because it is incredibly productive. If there was some way to redistribute its goods better. But in addition to the fact that it's not redistributing its goods better, and in fact it's just getting worse and worse, it's also so invasive. Just like you talk about the way that the screen moves from like the movie screen to the TV screen to the screen on your phone to now it's going to be projecting into our eyes, or a Google phone, or it's like the screen is getting closer and closer and closer to our actual surface of vision. So too does capitalism kind of send its logic of efficiency, of exploitation, of competition, of measuring herself, and through a certain kind of greed, of having greed be a kind of unspoken or spoken value, that all of those things just enter into ever minutely the little resistant pockets of our experience, our consciousness, our most intimate relationships. And it really is kind of a once you look at it, that capitalism functioning through things, I think it both helps clarify the technology critique, which is really important for a lot of people, especially young people who grow up and they're just swimming in it. But it also forces us to recognize how we ourselves, with our values, with the way we treat other people, with the way we think about our own lives and the values that we're putting out there, how we too are like a little mini battleground of these capitalist forces every day.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why I'm trying to tell a different story. That's where I'm not totally comfortable with it yet, but that's where, Team Human, the myth, or Team Human, the narrative, is so important. I'm trying to tell an alternative history of our species and society, and basing it in the real science of Darwin, rather than Darwin interpreted through this bizarre left coast libertarian, competitive lens. And that's that, being human is a team sport. The extent to which we are an evolved, developed species is really reflected in the extent to which we can collaborate. That's what made us. That's what evolution is. So we can collaborate with language. We can collaborate with technology. We can use all of these things we've learned to act more like a coordinated, unified team. I'm trying to tell that story without becoming like, Desjardins or something, without telling a fake story, without you know what I mean? Without resorting to mythology, I'm trying to tell it in a realistic way, as if this is a better way to understand where we come from and where we can go. This could lead to a more fun, sustainable future for us. And this is how this is how we're actually wired.
Yeah.
This is, much more fundamental and essential. But, the place that I'm kind of stuck now, and you're a great person to talk to about this, is, and it's funny because I've gotten talks with a mutual acquaintance of ours, Mark Stallman, a lot about this. And that is, whether we need to accept or believe that there's some pre-existing soul or consciousness or reason, some formal cause for humanity in order to operate this way. Do you know what I mean? It's like, are humans something more than the sum of our parts? I tend to think so, that we're not just, entropy makers. We're not just objects, that we are divine in some respect. And it's kind of a dangerous place to go, not individually, but it's dangerous if the logic of Team Human, if the logic of celebrating humanity, if the logic of defending the right for human beings to have a place in the digital future rather than just algorithms. The only argument I have for it is that human beings are special in some way. And that specialness, well, what is the origin of that? And do I need to have one?
Yeah, that's a really deep question. I mean, the way that I had formulated it in regards to your book was reading through, and you regularly contrast the human with these post-human technologies or algorithms or manipulative systems, and you never bother to try to explain what the human is. You kind of just let it be there, let it be in people's minds. Maybe you're almost, it's not even just like a dodge, because at first I was like, what's kind of a dodge? Like, what's the human? What are you trying to defend? And I have more to say about that in a minute. But then I came to kind of see that there's actually a kind of brilliance in that, which is not very, is very tentative and very vulnerable, which is that you're kind of trusting that your readers, your attentive readers, or even your less attentive readers, have kind of a general sense already of the difference between the human and some kind of post-human or superhuman state. But it might be very different. They might not share underlying axioms. They might not share worldviews. One might be secular and evolutionary. One might absolutely rely on some notion of spirit. But everyone's kind of got a sense that, like, yeah, I kind of know what it's like to be human. Like, I kind of know what the human side of my experience is. Sometimes I don't feel that human, whatever, in deep in meditation, blasted out in psychedelics, or contemplating my own algorithmic nature in the mirror of technological capital that has a certain model of who I am that's not human in that sense, and that I kind of go, geez, maybe that's who I really am. And I want to ask you about that in a second. But to stay with this question, in a way, it is kind of a bind. Certainly, if it's a bind around the fundamentally kind of spiritual versus secular model. Like, obviously you can be humanist and totally evolutionary and Darwinian. This is just a process. It's all emerged in natural history. There's no God, there's no essence, there's no particular quality, but it's just these are the values that we have as meat creatures. And it's just better. It's just more fun to keep that going in whatever way we can as these other processes are unleashed. And at the same time, in a way, a better axiom is something that is kind of religious, that does have some quality of specialness, even if it's not special just to the humans. It's maybe even special to the animals, because so many of these things they're not animals. Like, I feel closer, to dogs or even rats, even bugs sometimes, than I feel towards technology. Although in some ways technology is kind of like a big bug, or ant colony or whatever. It's got that kind of mechanistic, like kind of insect quality to it. In fact, in some ways, this is a little sidelight. I kind of think that, like, human beings as a species, at least for, once we got, sort of Neolithic civilization, early civilization going, we're kind of this weird hybrid of like, primate and insect. We're like ape ants. But in our stories, all our stories and our emotions and our symbols and all that is much more on the primate side. But our artifacts and our ways of relating with each other, our kind of productive systems, our mechanisms, our ability to seed large mega machines is much more insectoid. And where we're at right now is like the simian stories are starting to collapse under the pressure of all these much more insectoid systems that we've set in motion, which gives it all a creepy kind of in your face multiplicity thing, like the end of the third Matrix movie where they finally fight the baddies, and they're just these kinds of multiplicity machines. It's not like one bad boss character. It's like this kind of like seething hive of out of control kind of machines. And that's more what it kind of feels like. So what is the story? How do you keep the human story going without sounding like a reactionary humanist, without pulling a religious card? It's a tough one. It's really, and that was my biggest question about the book. I was like, especially, and you and I both came of age the same kind of time. When we were young, a lot of the critical theory and sort of deconstruction and contemporary philosophy was very anti-humanist. It was very critical of the ideas of humanism, because it saw the way that those led to forms of oppression and forms of exploitation. But now we have nothing else to really, we have nothing else as a shield other than this kind of wan humanism that may or may not be infused with some degree of religiosity that's nebulous enough so that we don't start fighting amongst ourselves. No, it's a soul. No, it's mine. No, it's just,
Right.
human things. So I don't know what else to do other than kind of keep it open and resonant for now, because
Right. Which is sort of that's where I'm trying to go with it, is to say that, look, the last major expression of humanism was during the Renaissance. And that was the humanism of the individual, the Vitruvian Man and all of those great Renaissance innovations, from perspective to the book, were all about an individual point of view. And then saying, well, what if our Renaissance is about the collective, a new understanding of humans as a group phenomenon? And whether or not there is a spiritual, religious origin aspect to it, the humans together allow for something seemingly magical to happen, something special, something different, something worthy of a place in the future. Because all I'm really doing is saying, do human beings deserve a place in the future? What is the difference between human beings and the zombies in those AMC Walking Dead shows? Is there a difference? And the difference is, if it's not that we have a soul, the difference at least is that we can regard one another. The zombies don't have teamwork. They're individuals. They're not conscious. We can find other people and connect. And something else happens when you connect to another person. And until we fully understand that, I think we owe it to ourselves not to go extinct.
I think that's really beautiful. And for me, I think that a slight difference is that I have trouble when I think about the group, the larger it gets, the more it's a group, the more it's a collective, then I'm like, okay, yes, there's positive things to come out of this. There's solidarity. There's the kind of sense of the crazy urban landscape of New York City or Black Rock City or Los Angeles. And I love cities. I'm an urban person. I love traveling to cities. So I love the sense of the multiplicity of the hive as a kind of vibe. But I think what you're just pointing out when we're trying to find that specialness about humans is something that's maybe easier to see on the level of conversation, on the level of you and I. And I think that's partly why literally you and I are drawn to this form, not just podcasts, but having conversations, having public conversations like the Team Human event that I took place with you. It's not just that like the only thing that matters is two people talking. It's that two people talking, really listening, empathizing, feeling with your hearts and your bodies if you get to be in the same space, is a model not only of a larger sense of togetherness, but it demonstrates that magic spark that you're talking about, which is not reliant on some essence. Human beings have a soul, they have inherent rights, blah, blah, blah. Instead, it's the capacity for sparks to fly and for something new to emerge, like in a jazz combo, where we're playing together and we're listening so intently that something new happens that neither of us are responsible for. And for me, this has always also been the limit of a certain kind of Eastern or a Western interpretation of Eastern ideas in terms of like it's all illusion, or we're all just projecting, or there's a neurological version, we all just want to run around with models of the world in our mind, and we're not actually engaging with reality. We're just engaging with our internal models as the brain runs a kind of simulation game all the time. And I'm like, okay, cool, sure, yeah, maybe we're in a simulation. But the place where that breaks down for me is when I'm encountering another, like an other with a capital O. I can't delimit that with like a story of projection. I just don't believe it. Now,
well, particularly another in pain.
Very good. Very good.
And I agree. I mean, the interesting thing is, it's funny. I was on Sam Harris's podcast, and he got concerned about the whole team human thing. So also talking about, well, when groups get too big or too important, that they can start repressing individual rights and all that. And, he kind of got into a slightly constitutional argument. And, and I said, well, the first right of the individual is the right to assemble, that
very
how
good.
can you even experience without assembly. But there's a difference between cities, which are kind of almost organic, natural amalgamations of people, and nation states, which are these artificial, top-down, ideologically organized myths of origin. So of course nation states are going to be oppressive or repressive because we don't really belong to nations. Cities, we practically were in them. That's what they are. They are much more the healthy natural ant hive termite mound than some kind of a nation state.
That makes a lot of sense. And it one of the things also I came away from your book that responds to that is, we're at a point where so many of our given narratives are being undermined, disrupted, whether by technologies that ask us to change our habits or expectations of what daily life is like, whether it's, new models of the self, actually I'm a biome with all these bacteria in my gut and it's a we, or whatever. There's just so many ways in which our even relatively recent ideas of what the human is, what society is, how society should work are being questioned. And yet there are some of these ideas like the nation state, which is so obviously a construct. Anybody with a thimbleful of history, it is like the example of what a construct is in that sociological sense of like, oh, everything is a construct, which I don't believe. But the nation state is definitely a construct. And yet, what are we seeing? We're seeing this like crazy nationalism, as if the very artifice of that concept somehow enables people to orient themselves at this time. And it's kind of a striking contradiction. And so what I really liked about your book is in a subtle way, right? Not just saying question reality, question your ideas. It's like, yeah, we've been doing that for a long time, but that there still are some core notions like you need a job, that jobs are important, jobs right. provide value. Well, oh my God, I still kind of believe that. And I'm like, why do I believe that? And I'm like, that's dumb, especially when all these other things are asking me to change my fundamental values, including values that are much more obviously positive than that one. So it does seem like we're at a point where like this is the only way through is forward, where like Yeah, we think we're like calling into question all these like structuring myths and ideas, but we still have a lot more to do.
Yeah, we do. And especially, I mean, the reason why now is an important time to do that is we are currently embedding these values into the algorithms that are going to be dictating human life in the future. We're embedding them just like, the Jews embedded values into Talmud, which became the laws by which human beings live. Now we're embedding values into the code by which people will live. Only the code is not transparent. Only a few people are going to be able to read it. Even fewer than lawyers can read code today or can read the law today. So it's kind of an essential responsibility that we retrieve these values before the value system is locked down.
Yeah, you have a wonderful. I mean, one of the things also again to praise the book is just there are many, many very pithy points where you're able to boil down these complex conditions into single sentences that hit almost like, kind of spooky apocalyptic poems about what, especially when you're accounting for things like the problem is not that the robots are going to take over. The problem is that as we hand over our lives to robots, we're going to take on these values and then it's like a feedback loop. And you're really good at describing that kind of feedback loop. But there's something about that. Maybe it's a slightly different question that I really wanted to ask you. And I'm actually going to read a little chunk because it kind of sets up the question. It's sort of earlier on. You're talking about persuasive technologies. You say, that's why persuasive technologies are not designed to influence us through logic or even emotional appeals. This isn't advertising or sales. You're talking about the new regime of persuasive technologies. It's not advertising or sales in the traditional sense, but more like wartime psyops or the sort of psychological manipulation exercised in prisons, casinos, and shopping malls. Just as the architects of those environments use particular colors, soundtracks, or lighting cycles to stimulate desired behavior, the designers of web platforms and phone apps and other technologies we can imagine use carefully tested animations and sounds to provoke optimal emotional responses from users. So you're talking about that level of control and manipulation. So my question for you is like, we're kind of both. Like in some sense, we are still agents that are thinking, choosing, nudging our own behavior to some degree. We can argue about it. We're still engaging. You and I are using language to connect. We have a sense of being in each other's space right now that's going to be gone in 20 minutes. And at the same time, there is that unconscious level of ourselves, our behavioral stimulus response machine that is constantly being manipulated, especially now, in ever more sophisticated ways, and in a way that I can't get to directly. I mean, I can look at it as a sociologist, I can study it in the lab, but I can't access it directly as it's happening. How do we negotiate kind of being in both worlds and recognizing that these anti-human forces that we're hopefully, gathering together to resist or oppose, how do we, navigate a domain, a territory where we can't even see the enemy because it's operating on us beneath our awareness?
Right. Or it's also easy to mistake the tool for the enemy. Just because capitalism is expressing itself through the web doesn't mean the web is itself capitalist, or it's necessarily disempowering, which is why all of these, supposed ironies that, oh, look at those protesters, Occupy kids, but they're protesting against Wall Street, but they're holding on to iPhones, as if that disproves the merits of what they're talking about. It's really tricky. I mean, one thing I've been telling people is to understand every technology they use as a drug, every single one. And you remember what Timothy Leary used to say about drugs. Before you take a drug, look into the eyes of somebody who's on the drug and decide if that's someplace you want to be. if you think about every technology that you turn on before you go on open your laptop, before you open your email program, before you look at your smartphone, before you install any app, if you think about, do I want to install this drug into my life? What am I like when I'm on this? And when I think about it that way, it goes all the way back. When you pick up a book, do I want to be on print now? When you decide to speak, do I want to be on English now? And once you start thinking about it that way, and I don't mean it in a oh my God, we'll never get there, but once you think about it, it's like, that's why monks would go on speech fasts. They'd go on silent retreats because, oh my gosh, yes, language is a great thing and it helped connect people to one another and did all this stuff and helped us collaborate. But different languages also have different affordances. Once you have a noun for everything, you're limiting each thing in some definition. I remember somebody's kid saying to him, God, once we have a name for something, we kind of kill it, don't we? I mean, yeah. I mean, you've limited it now. That is cat. And all those assumptions come in about what cat is. The languages of signifiers change our relationship to reality. So it seems to me it's more about being able to at least have extended periods of time when you're not online or on a medium or on a technology, just to kind of reset as best you can. I mean, meditation, is really hard for a lot of people, but what I'm starting to do is ask people when they say, what can we do? How do we start? What can we do? And I'm saying, gosh, fine. If you can take 10 minutes a week to start, where during that 10 minutes, you're not doing anything other than sitting with another person. Sit with someone for 10 minutes. You could talk if you have to, but if you could just sit, that's even better. If you got to play cards, that's okay. But sort of mindfully have 10 minutes with a person where you're not subjected to the agendas of all these things. Then, it's obvious for us now. You turn on the TV, you can see it trying to sell you things. You turn on the computer, you can see it trying to, extract your data or isolate you or atomize you from other people. It becomes so much easier to feel the effects of different media and technologies if you can kind of have a reset button. And that reset button, I hate to be so mechanomorphic about it, but if you can hit ground by just calibrating to another human, it becomes a lot easier to see, and the stuff feels less overwhelming then. We're lucky because we were around in the era of the internet where you would go online. And that was a discrete act. I'm now going to go online. Where kids now and people now, they don't go online. It's a constant state of being. But if you can return to that by having moments of non-connected, non-mediated, non-commercial, you're not producing or consuming, you're not buying or selling, it's a very Mr. Rogers moment for me where I realize, oh, I'm okay just the way I am. Mm-hmm. And it's so profound to get to touch that on a regular basis.
No, that's great. And that also has something to do with humanism. One of the lines that stuck with me in your book, it was just kind of a small bit where you were saying how a lot of the classic humanists sort of celebrated our foibles. We came out of this religious model where we were supposed to be pure, or if we weren't pure, we were just horrible sinners. And so in order to shift outside of that model of judgment, we had to kind of embrace our flaws and sort of recognize them. And that gives rise to the novel and flawed characters that we nonetheless love and see ourselves in relationship to. And it feels to me that one of the answers to what is the human is that sense of being aware of your own flaws, aware of your friend or lover's or wife or child's flaws, and sort of being with them and even feeling the unpleasantness there, but at the same time having that be in a space that you can sort of accept and work with, or even accept the way that you're always going to be irritated by it, or whatever that is. It's something about those flaws, those ordinary flaws, not the great heroic flaws, but just the ordinary flaws that feels like we're close to that human moments. So I love that idea of just sitting with people. But I'm also glad you mentioned meditation. You have some very interesting words to say about spirituality in the book and the ways in which certain aspects of, let's say, the countercultural spiritual explosion that, you and I in our own ways both fed off of or learned some things from, how aspects of that really helped in a way drive this kind of, after a few transformations, drive this sort of transhumanist model of a kind of sense of like that there's something in us that's not human, there's something in us that's of the beyond or of the future, which in a way is the same kind of idea that this transcendental part of us can be incarnated in new technologies or techniques that are going to make us more efficient, optimize, blah blah blah, and all that language of optimize, efficientize, balance, integrate, holism, even though there's different ways of interpreting it. Oftentimes when you hear that language, particularly today, it's kind of a code for this anti-human agenda. And so even spirituality, even the idea of like meditate, give yourself a break from the machine, even that is kind of a vexed territory. It's already there's already a contest on with multiple agendas, one of which is to like just get your psychology in line so you can be smoothly reproducing the forces of capital. And one of the hopes is that it just doesn't work, that the corporatization of meditation and mindfulness, the way in which it becomes part of consumer culture through like yoga sexiness and all that kind of narcissism of the health movement, that all of that is sort of a necessary bargain to create individuals who are too discontent with the way things are to just accept them blithely or accept them as just the way things are, man. You got to go with the flow. Instead, discovering a kind of oppositional energy that taking a media fast isn't just good for your psychic health, which it is, but it's also a way to regain autonomy. It's a way to regain clarity. It's a regain to strengthen yourself for what in some ways is a kind of ongoing assault on the human. That we're in a more conflictual territory, and we need these tools more like warriors than like soft, gushy, go with the flow, kind of corporate, holistic people, if you know what I mean. I mean, I'm kind of overgeneralizing, but I think that you've really kind of nailed some of the problems with the way in which this spirituality is used to perpetuate some of the problems you describe.
Yeah, well, and a lot of that comes, from your work and, technosis and this, quest out of body. This, so many people get involved in spirituality because they don't like who they are and how they are and the way things are, and they think that they're going to be able to travel out of body or somehow escape the chrysalis of matter and rise into pure consciousness and leave all this horrible stuff behind. And there's a self-loathing in there that just dovetails so well with Ray Kurzweil's singularity and uploading consciousness and escaping from the heathens and the masses and all the people that you've done wrong to, and somehow break my karmic cycle by escaping it that way. And it's I understand the drive. I can empathize with the drive, but that's not going to work.
What do you do? What works for you? How do you encourage this space in your busy life? You're a family man. You teach. You write tons of stuff. You're a busy guy.
It's funny. I encourage it by giving up. I spent a lot of time thinking, well, okay, I'm going to go on my book tour and just hunker down. And then when I'm through with it, I'll have time to experience the world the way I really want to. Then I'll stop writing books and, do like David Lynch says and, just, try to catch the big fish and all that. And something, I don't know, it was pretty recently, something flipped where I was like, no, I'm just going to do it moment to moment to moment. So yeah, I mean, I do a lot of yoga as a kind of a moving meditation. And I'm starting now just doing, I sit when I can. I mean, it's hard for me because, I'll get 500 to 1,000 emails in a day. And if I spend 15 minutes sitting and meditating, that's 6 people who didn't get answered. So the scale at which digital industrialism exposes me to sort of the pitfalls of a customer service existence, I had to weigh that against what value am I even creating if I'm driving myself into the ground, if I'm just going to die soon, trying to service everybody. So I kind of flipped on that. And it's not like I have boundaries so much as I'm accepting that, look, dude, I get you want a mentor and someone to help you pick a school or do this or help you with your book or read the thing you're doing. I just can't. God bless, there's a great school here you can go to, or maybe go to this list or go online here. Because I don't know, because I can't. And so, and that was part of the way we started this whole conversation, was that, wow, this book tour's kind of turning out different. I don't have an agenda. I'm not trying to do something. And that's really the practice for me, to not do anything for reasons other than its own sake, which is a really strange practice. But I remember in Talmud, they had some argument about Talmud, and they're like, well, what's the real reason to be studying Torah? Is it to develop one's ethics, or is it to know the stories of our history? And the rabbis said neither. The reason to read Torah is lishma, meaning for its own sake. You read Torah to read Torah. And it's a really nice lesson, especially for someone like me who feels like I need to justify every, cubic centimeter of air I breathe, or every, kilowatt of electricity I use and food I eat. It's like, there's a certain point at which you can't justify it. You're never going to be able, the ledger will never work out. So I had to just kind of drop that and decide that the doing is the thing. But if the doing is the thing, then you got to start looking at how you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah.
Because that's the only thing you really got, is what you're actually doing right now.
Yeah.
Is the only thing you truly, truly, truly know for sure.
Well, that's a great place to end. That's wonderful. And if the Team Human does nothing except invite you into this transformation, it's already a classic in my view. But of course, it's more than that. And so I encourage people to read it. I think it's really important what you're doing. Always lovely to talk to you. And thanks for joining us on Expanding Mind.
Thank you. Thanks for expanding my mind.
Righty-o. Okay, folks, till next week, keep your minds open.